For decades, Canada had carefully crafted its reputation as a diplomatic and patient neighbor, playing by the rules of trade agreements and international diplomacy. It was a nation that valued stability and balance, consistently working to maintain peaceful relations with its southern neighbor, the United States. This approach had allowed Canada to prosper, secure in its role as a reliable partner in the global economy. However, when Donald Trump took office and began escalating his trade war, everything changed. Trump's actions shook the foundations of the long-standing relationship between the two countries, forcing Canada to rethink its role on the global stage. The tipping point came when Trump slapped hefty tariffs on Canadian goods, particularly aluminum and steel, two industries that were not just vital to Canada's economy, but were also intricately connected to American supply chains. Trump justified these tariffs by claiming they were necessary to protect American jobs, but for Canada, it felt like an economic stranglehold. The tariffs were seen not just as an economic attack, but as an attempt to undermine Canada's sovereignty and its economic independence. While the federal government in Ottawa sought diplomatic solutions, Premier David Eby of British Columbia refused to sit idly by. British Columbia, a province known for its innovation and progressive policies, became the first to take concrete action. Eby stood before the Legislative Assembly and made a bold declaration. He didn't simply announce tolls on U.S. freight trucks transiting through British Columbia. He declared that Canada would no longer tolerate the aggressive economic tactics of the Trump administration. "We are doing everything we can to detach from the U.S., to move to other markets, to get away from the whims of one person in the White House," Eby stated, making it clear that British Columbia was ready to take matters into its own hands. This speech marked a turning point in Canada's approach to trade and diplomacy. Eby's actions were not just symbolic but strategic. The tolls were the first step in a broader plan to reduce Canada's reliance on the United States and shield its industries from the unpredictable nature of U.S. policies. The world was watching as Canada began to chart its own course, signaling that it was no longer willing to be pushed around by a single nation's economic policies. The move was seen as both a response to Trump's tariffs and a calculated effort to protect Canadian sovereignty, with British Columbia leading the charge. In response to the tariffs, British Columbia introduced a comprehensive economic resilience strategy. This strategy had one central goal: to reduce dependence on U.S. trade. Instead of relying on American imports and exports, the province began to prioritize domestic trade, encouraging businesses within Canada to look inward rather than southward. By shifting focus to interprovincial trade, British Columbia was building a more self-sufficient economy. This was not a temporary retaliation. It was a structural change aimed at weakening the leverage the United States held over Canada. But the tolls were just one part of the plan. Eby's government also introduced low-carbon fuel mandates, which required fuel to be sourced domestically. This policy had two key objectives: to cut out American suppliers and to bolster Canada's green energy sector. It was a move designed to assert Canada's control over its economic destiny, while also contributing to the global fight against climate change. By reducing reliance on American oil and gas imports, Canada was sending a strong message that it would no longer allow foreign policies to dictate its economic future. These policies represented more than just economic strategies. They were declarations of independence. Eby and his government were sending a clear message to the U.S. If America wanted to play hardball, Canada would be more than willing to play back. British Columbia's response was a blueprint for economic independence, a move that would resonate far beyond the province's borders. But while Canada was fortifying its economy, something much bigger was unfolding on the global stage. The ripple effects of British Columbia's defiance reached Silicon Valley, where Nvidia, the world's leading AI chipmaker, was about to face its greatest financial crisis. Nvidia had been at the forefront of the AI revolution, supplying the powerful chips that were essential for AI development and data processing. But in the wake of the US-China trade war and Trump's aggressive policies, Nvidia's market value began to collapse. The chain reaction started in early 2020, when the U.S. government imposed stringent export restrictions on semiconductors, particularly targeting China. This move was designed to slow down China's progress in AI development by restricting access to advanced AI chips. Nvidia, a key player in the global tech industry, was hit hard by these restrictions, as a significant portion of its revenue came from sales to Chinese companies. The decision to block these exports was meant to safeguard U.S. technological leadership, but instead, it sent shockwaves through the market, triggering a massive sell-off of Nvidia's stock. Nvidia's fall from grace was steep and swift. The company's stock value, which had once been a shining example of the success of American tech companies, plummeted at an unprecedented rate. On January 27, 2020, Nvidia lost $589 billion in a single day. But this was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, Nvidia's market value continued to slide, dropping a staggering $1 trillion. Investors were gripped by panic, uncertain about the long-term effects of the U.S. trade policies on the global tech industry. The crisis wasn't just confined to Nvidia, it was a global issue. Wall Street had seen market corrections before, but nothing on this scale. The collapse of Nvidia was a clear signal that the trade war, particularly Trump's aggressive economic policies, were beginning to backfire. The very industries that Trump sought to protect, American tech companies, were now under threat. The irony of the situation was profound. Trump's trade war, which was meant to protect American jobs and industries, had unintentionally harmed the very companies it was supposed to defend. Nvidia, once a symbol of American innovation, was now a shadow of its former self. But how did the tolls on U.S. trucks in British Columbia contribute to Nvidia's downfall? The answer lies in the interconnectedness of the global economy and the domino effect triggered by Canada's actions. Nvidia had built its success on the foundation of globalization. Its chips weren't just manufactured in the U.S., they were part of an intricate global supply chain. Taiwan's TSMC was responsible for manufacturing the most advanced AI processors, while China provided critical raw materials. Canada, too, played a vital role, supplying essential metals like nickel and aluminum that were necessary for the cooling systems of high-performance semiconductors. When British Columbia imposed tolls on U.S. trucks, it sent a clear signal to the world. Canada was no longer willing to tolerate the U.S.'s economic aggression. This move was not just a protest, it was part of a larger global response to U.S. trade policies. Countries like Canada, which had long been seen as passive players in the global economic landscape, were now standing up and pushing back. As the world watched, investors began to realize that the U.S. was no longer the only power in the global economy. This shift in power dynamics was highlighted when Chinese companies began to find alternatives to Nvidia's chips. DeepSeek, a Chinese AI startup, unveiled its revolutionary R1 AI model, which was powered by alternative chips that didn't rely on Nvidia's technology. This was a clear challenge to the U.S.'s dominance in the AI sector. The message was clear. China was no longer waiting for permission to develop its own AI economy. It was building it, with or without Nvidia. But the most devastating blow came when reports surfaced that Chinese tech firms had found ways to circumvent the U.S. export restrictions, obtaining Nvidia chips through indirect channels. This was a direct challenge to the effectiveness of the U.S. sanctions and a clear sign that China had adapted to the changing landscape. For investors, the implications were enormous. If China no longer needed Nvidia's chips, what did that mean for the future of the U.S. tech industry? The fear of losing dominance in the global AI market led to widespread panic among investors. Hedge funds dumped Nvidia stock at an alarming rate, fearing that the U.S. was no longer the undisputed leader in AI technology. The once invincible Nvidia, the company leading the charge in AI innovation, was now a cautionary tale of how quickly the tides of global power could shift. In the end, Canada's bold move in imposing tolls on U.S. trucks was not just a symbolic gesture. It was the first domino in a much larger chain of events that sent shockwaves through the global economy. The economic retaliation against Trump's trade war highlighted the growing dissatisfaction with U.S. policies and marked a turning point in the balance of global power. The question now is, will the U.S. back down? Will Trump reconsider his economic war for the sake of the American economy? Or will the global shift continue, with more countries taking action against U.S. policies? As we move forward, one thing is clear: the global economic landscape is changing, and Canada's defiance may just be the beginning. Do you think this shift in power will continue? Will other countries follow Canada's lead and stand up to U.S. economic policies? Let us know what you think in the comments section.